Let's take a trip back a long time ago. No, way further than that. You've just entered the prehistoric Amazon, but instead of seeing colorful poison dart frogs or piranhas darting through murky shallows, you're instead face to face with creatures way larger. Snakes thicker than tree trunks and larger than school buses are coiling through the floodplains. Caimans the size of city buses are patrolling the riverbanks, and normal animals are now, well, anything but normal. This is the world of prehistoric Amazonian gigantism, a type of gigantism that most people aren't even aware of since it happened tens of millions of years ago. But unlike deep-sea gigantism, prehistoric Amazonian gigantism covers everything in the ecosystem, even the rivers, the forest floors, and the swampy shallows. And oddly enough, most of these prehistoric giants didn't even get big for the same reason. Many lived in completely different eras and never even knew each other existed. Yet they all got absolutely massive. Why do we continuously see giants throughout almost all eras of prehistoric Amazonia? And which descendants of these giants are still alive today? To understand what might just be the most overlooked form of gigantism, we first have to take a look at one of the most jaw-dropping examples of it. Titanoboa, the largest snake to ever slither across this planet. And I know what you're thinking, that this thing couldn't possibly have actually existed since it looks like someone took a modern anaconda and just kept going, like they forgot to stop. Titanoboa wasn't even a close relative of today's anacondas either, though it was a constrictor. But believe it or not, this thing was an apex predator of the Paleocene epoch, which is honestly terrifying since it looks like something you'd only see in a nightmare or a very bad sci-fi movie. Of course, the only reason it was able to be an apex predator was because of its sheer gigantic size. Most estimates put Titanoboa at around 42 to 47 feet long, with a body so thick it wouldn't fit through a standard door frame. A few other estimates push it even larger, but those aren't widely supported. What everyone does agree on is that these creatures were enormous. Compare these to a green anaconda today. The largest green anacondas on record barely crack 20 feet, and they're already considered the heaviest snakes alive. Titanoboa wasn't just a bigger version of that. It was operating in an entirely different size class, and unlike an anaconda, Titanoboa's mass was real, dense, muscular body, not a misleading length stat padded out by anything. But who would win in a fight between a Titanoboa and a modern green anaconda? Well, keep in mind these things evolved in completely different time periods, with green anacondas existing since only a few million years ago and Titanoboa being around 58 to 60 million years ago. But for the sake of the hypothetical, let's take a look. Titanoboa outweighs a green anaconda by a factor of roughly 5 to 1. A large anaconda might hit 500 pounds on a good day. Titanoboa was closer to 2,500 pounds. That's the difference between a golden retriever and a horse. If you're imagining the anaconda being able to coil around Titanoboa and suffocate it, the math just doesn't work. Titanoboa simply has too much body mass to be squeezed into submission. The anaconda would be overpowered almost immediately. Unless the anaconda somehow got the first bite on something vital, Titanoboa wins this one, and it probably isn't close. But this size advantage is actually the same reason Titanoboa got so big in the first place. In the Paleocene Amazon, something had just happened that completely wiped the slate clean. The asteroid had hit. The non-avian dinosaurs were gone. The massive marine reptiles were gone. Almost everything sitting at the top of the food chain was just gone. And in the warm, wet, endlessly productive floodplains of what would become the Amazon basin, there was a power vacuum sitting right at the top. Something had to fill it, and in an ecosystem full of fish, turtles, and primitive crocodilians with no fast, large predators to worry about, size alone was enough to make you untouchable. You didn't need speed, and you didn't need complex hunting strategy. You just need to be too big for anything else to mess with. Being a cold-blooded constrictor also helped, since the Paleocene climate was significantly warmer than today, which allowed reptile metabolisms to run hot enough to support that kind of body mass. With warm temperatures and rivers full of easy prey, there was no shortage of food for Titanoboa, and so it just kept growing. But while Titanoboa was dominating the Paleocene floodplains, something else had to take over once the climate shifted and the ecosystems changed. And following along with the Amazonian gigantism effect, what came next was also absolutely enormous. These were the Purussaurus, also known as the biggest caimans that ever existed, and the largest of them could grow over 40 feet long, which is definitely bigger than most people's living rooms, the hallway outside them, and probably the street in front of their house. But why did these guys also get so big? You might think it's because of how productive the environment was, and you'd be partially right. But the real driver was, again, an arms race. The Miocene Amazon wasn't just a river, it was basically an inland sea. As the Andes Mountains were still rising, they blocked what had been a westward draining river system and transformed the entire interior of South America into a vast network of lakes, swamps, and shallow waterways. Imagine the Amazon basin, but flooded. Permanently. Wall to wall with fish, turtles, giant rodents, and all manner of prey. Purussaurus lived in this environment and had access to practically unlimited food. And when everything around you is getting bigger and tougher, the only way to stay on top is to scale up. Bigger bodies meant more strength, more reach, more bite force, and a massive advantage in shallow water where half the ecosystem was competing with the other half. Purussaurus fossils have been found with bite marks from other Purussaurus, which is more evidence of these apex predators eating each other. Most arms races were just animals competing against their own kind, forcing them to evolve bigger and bigger until their bodies couldn't practically be any larger. If you've been paying any attention, you'll notice this is a familiar pattern from prehistoric ecosystems everywhere. The apex predators became apex by simply growing larger and larger until they were giant versions of themselves, and then their only real competition was each other. And this is how Phorusrhacids came to be, or as most people know them, terror birds. These were the Dunkleosteus of the Amazonian land ecosystem, basically the final boss of a whole separate arms race happening on the floodplain edges at the same time. The biggest estimates put them at over 10 feet tall, with a skull built like a hatchet and a beak capable of driving downward with enough force to stun or kill large prey in a single strike. And yes, they could run. Fast. They weren't slow, lumbering giants. They were fast, aggressive, and terrifyingly good at what they did. The South American landmass during this era was an island continent, completely cut off from North America. No wolves, no big cats, no hyenas. The mammals that evolved there had no experience with that kind of predator. And in an ecosystem where the prey had never developed defenses against a fast, giant stabbing bird, the terror birds thrived. Fossils have been found suggesting they were hunting animals much larger than what you'd expect a bird to take on. Because when your prey has no idea what you are or how to escape you, being absolutely enormous is a significant advantage. First, the Amazon made a giant snake. Then it made a giant caiman. Then it made a giant bird. And following the same pattern we see in prehistoric oceans, essentially any body plan could become dominant for its time period. It just had to be the first of its kind to evolve into a giant. Now, fast forward to more recent prehistoric history. By the Pleistocene, the top predators weren't weird serpents or birds anymore. Instead, they were mammals and oversized versions of animals we'd almost recognize today. The Amazon ecosystem was enormous and warm all over. High biodiversity, dense forest cover, and massive river systems created some of the most productive ecosystems ever seen. With that much life packed into one place, predators could grow absurdly large because there was always something to eat. And as the ecosystem filled with more and more megafauna, the only way to compete was to also be megafauna. Giant ground sloths over 12 feet tall were wandering around. Megatherium, the largest of them, weighed up to 4 tons and dwarfed anything alive in South America today. And again, this wasn't driven by oxygen or anything atmospheric. You just had to be big to compete. And this is exactly what happened to what is now a fairly normal-looking rodent. Meet Josephorartigeza monesi, the largest rodent to ever exist. Josephorartigeza was over 4 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 pounds, which puts it in the size range of a bison. It had incisors powerful enough to bite through bone. It wasn't big because of some unusual climate event. It was big because the Pleistocene South American ecosystem was a world of giants, and you had to be a certain scale just to survive in it. But here's the big question still. If these giant builds were so successful, why did they all die out? Where are the giants today? Well, the most obvious thing that removed them was extinction. About 10,000 years ago, the megafauna of the Americas were almost completely wiped out in an extremely short window of time, probably through a combination of climate shifts at the end of the last ice age and, almost certainly, humans hunting them. Even if giant ground sloths were enormous, they couldn't evolve fast enough to respond to organized human hunters who had never existed as a threat before. The playing board was wiped and reset. And let's say we somehow transported a Purussaurus into the modern Amazon. Would it start dominating the waterways again as the top apex predator? Probably not. And it isn't just because of food. Reptilian gigantism at that scale has basically stopped being viable. Modern food webs are tighter and more competitive. The Miocene inland sea that produced Purussaurus no longer exists. The Amazon is now a fast-flowing river system, not a vast shallow lake. A 40-foot caiman can't ambush prey effectively in a river with strong currents the way it could in a slow, shallow inland sea. The entire ecosystem it was built for is gone. And reptiles at that scale burn massive amounts of calories just staying alive. Unlike warm-blooded predators like jaguars or giant otters, a cold-blooded reptile the size of Purussaurus would need the right temperatures and the right prey density constantly. Modern Amazonia, while still extraordinarily biodiverse, simply doesn't have the volume of large, slow prey that the Miocene inland sea did. You could also include the fact that there's no chance humans would tolerate a 40-foot caiman wandering around. But I excluded us from this hypothetical. But as you might know, Amazonian gigantism didn't fully disappear. It's just not the same scale as it was in prehistoric times. Some descendants of these giants are still with us, hiding in plain sight. The green anaconda might not be as long as Titanoboa, but still reaches over 500 pounds and remains the heaviest snake alive. The black caiman still grows up to 20 feet and is the apex predator of much of the Amazon river system. The giant river otter reaches up to 6 feet long, which doesn't sound impressive until you remember it's an otter. The giants today are just different and are much more niche compared to the giants of the past. We don't see giant snakes the size of school buses or caimans longer than most boats anymore, but the arms race never fully ended. Anacondas evolved to grow as large as the modern Amazon can actually support them. Jaguars evolved into the most powerful big cat relative to their size on Earth, designed for an environment where prey can be armored, aquatic, or just extremely large. We still see these same patterns play out today, just with smaller animals calibrated for a tighter, more competitive ecosystem. But if another extinction event happened and cleared the board again, if the climate shifted and the floodplains returned and the prey base exploded, something in the Amazon would start growing again. It always does.